My name is Kira, and I am 33 years old. Today, I stand as a leading neurosurgeon and the chief executive officer of a biotech empire holding patents worth tens of millions of dollars. I have built a fortress of success that no one can tear down. But 10 years ago, I was just a desperate medical student standing in my childhood bedroom, staring at the ruins of my only professional blazer, completely destroyed by my sister. I still remember the stinging smell of bleach burning my nose and the cruel smirk on her face. When my parents rushed into the room, they did not comfort me. They told me to stop making a scene. I had no idea that this exact ruined jacket would become the ultimate weapon I would use to dismantle their lives and take back everything they stole. Let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Please hit that like button and subscribe if you have ever faced family members who underestimated your worth. Growing up in Fairfield, Connecticut, meant projecting an image of privilege. But inside our sprawling colonial home, emotional coldness permeated every corner. Our house, with its manicured lawn and heated pool, was a fortress of expectations I could never meet. My bedroom, painted pale blue, at my mother Helen's strict request, despite my preference for green, became my prison sanctuary. I maintained a flawless academic record, pouring my soul into science, hoping to earn a fraction of the warmth my parents freely gave my younger sister. Serena was the undisputed golden child. 3 years younger than me, she was entirely focused on climbing the social ladder. While I spent weekends volunteering at the clinic and studying for the medical admission test, Serena spent hers racking up charges on my father's credit cards. My parents never hid their favoritism. To them, my ambition was an expensive nuisance, while Serena's lifestyle was an investment in the family's social standing. This toxic dynamic reached its breaking point 10 years ago on the most important night of my life. I was 23 and self-funded. I had secured an interview for the most prestigious medical fellowship at Johns Hopkins Hospital. Winning this fellowship meant a full ride, a guaranteed residency, and the beginning of a brilliant surgical career. Because my parents refused to contribute to my education, I worked double shifts at a diner just to afford a train ticket to Baltimore. I could not afford a new suit, so I scoured a local thrift store and found a tailored black blazer. I spent 3 nights carefully altering the seams by hand until it fit perfectly. It was my armor. It was the only professional piece of clothing I owned, hung carefully on my bedroom door. It was past midnight. I was sitting on my bed reviewing my interview notes one last time when my bedroom door swung open. Serena walked in holding a large plastic jug of concentrated laundry bleach. She had been arguing with our mother earlier about floral arrangements for her wedding to Bradley. Bradley was a wealthy, arrogant white man from a prominent family, and my parents were bending backward to impress him. Serena did not say a word to me. She simply walked straight to my door, unscrewed the cap of the bleach, and viciously splashed the toxic liquid all over my black blazer. I screamed, jumping off the bed as the harsh chemical splashed onto the hardwood floor. The heavy black fabric of my blazer instantly began to hiss and bubble violently, transforming into a sickly rusted orange and burnt white. "What are you doing?" I cried out, grabbing a towel to stop the dripping, but the damage was already done. The fabric was completely ruined, stained with chaotic, ugly splotches. Serena just rolled her eyes, tossing the empty jug onto my desk. "Oops," she said, her voice dripping with artificial innocence. My hand slipped. "I guess you cannot go to that stupid interview tomorrow. You should just stay home and help me pick out table centerpieces." Hearing my shout, my parents hurried down the hallway and pushed past Serena into my room. I held up the dripping, ruined blazer, my hands shaking with a mixture of devastation and absolute rage. "Look what she did," I yelled, my voice breaking. "My interview is tomorrow morning. This is the only jacket I have." My mother. Helen looked at the ruined garment, then at the bleach bottle, and finally settled her cold gaze on me. She did not yell at Serena. She did not apologize. Instead, she let out a long, exhausted sigh. "Kira, lower your voice and stop making a scene," she scolded, crossing her arms. "Your sister is under a tremendous amount of stress right now. Do you have any idea how much pressure she is under?" "Pressure?" I asked, completely stunned. "She just destroyed my only chance at Johns Hopkins." My father stepped forward. his face hardening into a scowl. Do not be so dramatic, Kira. It is just a jacket. Medical school is a ridiculous financial drain anyway. You know perfectly well that we are stretching our budget to the absolute limit for Serena and Bradley's wedding next month. Bradley's family expects a certain standard of luxury, and we cannot afford to look cheap in front of them. The wedding is our priority right now, not your unrealistic medical dreams. Just look for a job as a nurse. You are prioritizing her wedding over my career, I asked. Bradley comes from a very important family, my mother added. He is giving your sister a real future, drowning in debt to play doctor. Just go to sleep, we are done. They walked out of the room, leaving me in the fumes. Serena smirked before shutting the door. I stood in silence, holding my ruined blazer, gripping the burnt fabric. Cold resolve settled over my heart. I was going to that interview regardless of what they said. I took the ruined blazer into the small adjacent bathroom and ran it under cold water. The fabric hissed faintly, releasing the last of the toxic chemical scent. I scrubbed the edges of the bleach stains, hoping to at least neutralize the damage, but the rusted orange and stark white patches were permanent. They crawled up the left sleeve and sprawled aggressively across the right lapel, looking like a violent, abstract painting. I wrung out the heavy fabric and draped it over the shower rod to dry. Sleep was impossible. I sat on the floor of my pale blue room, listening to the muffled snores of my parents down the hall and the occasional ping of Serena's phone from the next room. They slept soundly, completely untroubled by the fact that they had just tried to sabotage my future. I watched the clock tick toward 4 in the morning. When the blazer was mostly dry, I plugged in my cheap iron and pressed the fabric until the sharp creases returned. It was ruined, but it was going to be crisp. I put on my simple white cotton shirt, a plain black skirt, and finally slipped my arms into the bleached jacket. Looking in the mirror, the contrast was shocking. The jacket screamed of poverty, chaos, and absolute neglect. But my eyes, staring back at the reflection, were cold, sharp, and entirely focused. I gathered my leather portfolio, grabbed my keys, and slipped out the back door before the sun even crested the horizon. I walked 2 miles to the train station in the freezing dark air, boarding the first train to Baltimore. The rhythmic clacking of the train wheels provided a steady beat to my racing thoughts. Every time the conductor walked past, his eyes snagged on the chaotic orange stains splashed across my shoulder. I ignored him completely. I spent the entire long journey reviewing complex surgical procedures, neurological pathways, and recent medical journals. I absolutely refused to let my family betrayal occupy my mind for another second. By the time the train pulled into Baltimore, the morning rush hour was in full swing. I navigated the bustling streets, blending into the crowd of commuters, until the towering, pristine campus of Johns Hopkins Hospital loomed into view. The sheer magnitude of the institution was intimidating. This was the pinnacle of medical excellence, a place where legacies were forged and the elite came to prove their absolute worth. I took a deep breath, adjusted the damaged lapels of my jacket, and walked through the heavy glass doors. The interior of the hospital was immaculate, smelling of sterile antiseptic and expensive floor wax. I approached the main reception desk and directed the receptionist to the fellowship interview suite on the 9th floor. The receptionist, a lovely woman with a polite smile, glanced directly at my blazer. Her smile faltered for a fraction of a second before her strict professional training kicked back in. She handed me a visitor badge and pointed toward the elevators. I rode up to the 9th floor in total silence. When the elevator doors slid open, I stepped into an entirely different world. The waiting room for the surgical fellowship was lined with plush leather chairs, heavy mahogany tables, and soft, warm lighting. The room was already occupied by 8 other highly qualified candidates. They looked like they had stepped out of a catalog for wealthy young medical professionals. The men wore perfectly tailored navy and charcoal suits with expensive silk ties. The women wore pristine designer blazers, gleaming pearl earrings, and carried expensive briefcases. I stood in the doorway, suddenly acutely aware of the rough texture of my cheap skirt and the glaring burnt orange bleach stains screaming across my black jacket. Every single head in the room turned toward me. The collective intake of breath was practically audible in the quiet space. For a moment, total silence descended on the waiting area. Then the cruel whispers began. A tall man with perfectly styled blonde hair leaned toward the woman sitting next to him, his eyes raking over my outfit. He muttered something behind his hand, and the woman let out a short, muffled laugh, quickly pressing her hand to her mouth to hide her deep amusement. Another candidate, a young woman meticulously adjusting her expensive gold watch, stared openly at the bleach stain on my sleeve with an expression of pure disgust. It was exactly as if I had dragged filthy mud into their pristine sanctuary. I walked steadily across the room, keeping my spine perfectly straight and my chin held high. I found an empty chair near the far corner and sat down, placing my worn leather portfolio neatly on my lap. The whispering did not stop, it only grew bolder. A candidate sitting just 2 chairs away leaned over to his peer and spoke loudly enough for me to clearly hear. He said he did not realize the hospital was interviewing the janitorial staff today. I felt a hot flush of deep humiliation creep up my neck, but I forced my breathing to remain slow and steady. I reminded myself exactly why I was here today. I was not here to win a superficial fashion contest. I was here because I had the highest board scores in my graduating class. I was here because my surgical dexterity evaluations were utterly flawless. I sat in that leather chair for 45 agonizing minutes. Every time the heavy mahogany door to the interview room opened, the candidates would straighten their ties and smooth their skirts, shooting me sideways glances that practically screamed that I did not belong. I absorbed every sneer, every hushed joke, and every condescending glare. I let their wealthy, privileged arrogance fuel the hot fire burning in my chest. I watched them perform their rehearsed smiles, knowing that none of them had fought as hard as I had to be in this room. My family wanted me to feel shame and defeat. The heavy mahogany door finally swung open. A stern administrative assistant called my name, her eyes briefly widening as they landed on my bleach-stained shoulder. I stood up, smoothing the ruined fabric, and walked past the smirking candidates into the inner sanctum. Dr. Sterling sat behind a massive oak desk, surrounded by walls lined with framed medical degrees and prestigious awards. He was an imposing figure with sharp, calculating eyes that immediately locked onto my jacket. I could practically see the disgust forming in the tight line of his jaw. He offered no seat. He simply stared at the chaotic orange patches dominating my attire, his pen tapping an impatient rhythm against his leather blotter. I expect a certain level of respect for this institution, Dr. Sterling began, his voice dropping the temperature in the room by 10 degrees. This fellowship is the most competitive surgical program in the country. We invite only the top 1% of medical minds. Yet you walk into my office looking as though you just crawled out of a chemical spill. If you cannot manage basic professional hygiene, how can I possibly trust you in a sterile operating room? I kept my posture perfectly straight, locking my gaze onto his. Dr. Sterling, I replied, my tone measured and void of apology. My appearance today is the result of an unforeseen domestic incident late last night. I chose to attend this interview in a damaged blazer because my commitment to becoming a neurosurgeon heavily outweighs my vanity. My board scores are perfect. My surgical rotations received flawless marks. I am here because my hands are steady and my mind is sharp. He scoffed, clearly unimpressed. He leaned forward, shaking his head. Confidence is a requirement, but arrogance is a liability. Your lack of judgment in presenting yourself this way tells me everything I need to know. He reached for the thick manila folder resting on the corner of his desk, snapping it open to quickly sign his rejection on my application. He grabbed his heavy fountain pen, ready to dismiss me to the mocking crowd outside. But as his eyes scanned the top sheet of paper, his hand suddenly froze. The pen hovered just an inch above the paper. He blinked, pushing his silver spectacles further up the bridge of his nose. The harsh lines of his face slackened, replaced by an expression of pure, unadulterated shock. He looked from the paper to me, then back to the paper again. "Kira," he muttered, his voice entirely stripped of its former hostility. "Your full legal name is Kira Vance Washington." "Yes," I answered, slightly thrown by the sudden shift in his demeanor. I rarely use the hyphenated surname professionally, but it is on all my legal documentation. Dr. Sterling slowly placed his pen down on the desk. He took a deep breath, gesturing toward one of the plush chairs opposite him. "Please sit down." I took the seat, maintaining my guarded expression. He closed the folder, resting his clasped hands on top of it. "I owe you an apology." He said the words heavy with disbelief. I had no idea. When I saw the name Kira Vance on the initial roster, I did not make the connection. "You are the granddaughter of Dr. Eleanor Washington." The name hit me like a physical blow. My grandmother had been a brilliant biomedical researcher, but she passed away when I was a teenager. My parents rarely spoke of her, dismissing her work as eccentric and financially unstable. I confirmed, my heart beginning to hammer a frantic rhythm against my ribs. "But I do not see how that is relevant to my surgical fellowship application." Dr. Sterling let out a breath that sounded almost like a laugh of pure disbelief. "Relevant, Kira. Your grandmother was a pioneer in neurological tissue regeneration. I worked under her as a junior resident. She was an absolute titan in the medical field. But that is not why I am so shocked." He leaned closer, his eyes scanning my ruined blazer with an entirely new perspective. He no longer saw a poor, disheveled student. He was looking at a ghost or a missing heir. "You are sitting here applying for a sponsored fellowship wearing a destroyed jacket because you clearly could not afford a replacement. This does not make any sense at all." "Medical school is expensive," I stated, confused by his sudden intrusive observation about my finances. "I am entirely self-funded." Dr. Sterling shook his head emphatically. "That is impossible. Eleanor made it incredibly clear before she died. She was completely estranged from your mother, Helen, and she heavily distrusted your father. When she passed, she bypassed them entirely. She established an irrevocable trust fund specifically for your medical education and career advancement. She also left you full ownership of 3 highly lucrative medical device patents." I sat frozen in the heavy leather chair. The sterile smell of the hospital suddenly made me feel intensely nauseous. "A trust fund," I whispered, my voice sounding incredibly small in the vast, quiet office. "Yes," Dr. Sterling confirmed, his voice thick with absolute certainty. $5 million in liquid assets plus the ongoing royalties from her surgical patents. It was placed under a protective guardianship until your 21st birthday, but the funds were designated exclusively for your academic and professional use. I know this because I was one of the medical advisors consulted during the patent valuations. You are an heiress to a massive medical legacy. You should not be working double shifts at a diner to buy train tickets, and you certainly should not be wearing a ruined thrift store jacket." The office walls seemed to close in. $5 million, medical patents, a protective guardianship. The puzzle pieces slammed together in my mind, creating a picture so horrifying it stole the breath from my lungs. My own parents had deliberately stolen my entire future to secretly fund the extravagant lifestyle of the golden child. The revelation hung in the sterile air of the office, suffocating me with its heavy truth. My mind raced backward, tearing through years of fabricated struggles. The pieces of my past, deliberately scattered by the people supposed to protect me, slammed together with terrifying clarity. I remembered my 18th birthday when my father suddenly purchased a luxury SUV, claiming a lucky bonus at work. I thought about Serena's exorbitant wedding budget, the designer dresses, the venue that cost more than my entire medical school tuition, and the casual way my mother dismissed my financial desperation. Then came the sick realization. Bradley, my arrogant, condescending future brother-in-law, had recently launched a technology startup. My parents had proudly bragged to our relatives about providing him with his initial seed capital, framing it as an investment in family. They were not investing their own money. They had systematically abused their legal guardianship, exploiting a dead woman's wishes to drain my trust fund and bankroll the golden child's lavish fantasy. They had stolen my grandmother's legacy to buy the affection of an elitist white family who looked down on us anyway. They had purposefully watched me exhaust myself working double shifts until my hands bled, sacrificing my youth to afford basic textbooks. Every time I begged them for a minor loan, they rejected me, citing their tight budget, while simultaneously siphoning millions from the account, meant to guarantee my financial security. I looked at Dr. Sterling, my vision blurring slightly, before sharpening into crystalline focus. The humiliation I had felt in the waiting room evaporated, replaced by a cold, calculating fury. "Dr. Sterling," I said, my voice eerily calm, "I need to ask you for a favor. I need the direct contact information for the legal team that handled my grandmother's estate, and I need your absolute discretion regarding everything we discussed here today. My family cannot know I am aware of this trust fund." He nodded slowly, his expression a mixture of profound sympathy and newfound respect. He reached into his bottom drawer, pulling out a heavy cardstock business card and handing it across the desk. "You have the fellowship, Kira," he stated firmly. "Your flawless academic record earned it, but your resilience just solidified it. Take the rest of the day. Contact this firm immediately. They are incredibly aggressive, and they absolutely despise fraud." I stood up, smoothing the ruined, bleached lapel of my blazer. It no longer felt like a symbol of poverty or humiliation. It felt like battle armor. I thanked him, shook his hand firmly, and walked out of the expansive office. The privileged candidates in the waiting room sneered as I passed them, but their petty judgments were entirely meaningless to me now. I was not a pathetic charity case. I was a millionaire whose massive fortune had been maliciously hijacked by thieves masquerading as parents. I gathered the rest of my medical documents, ensuring nothing was left behind, and smoothly exited the grand building. Stepping out into the crisp afternoon air, the imposing architecture of the hospital no longer felt intimidating. It felt like the grand stage of my inevitable return. The train ride to Connecticut felt completely different than the anxious journey there. I was no longer a desperate student begging for an opportunity. I was an heir meticulously planning a war. I stared out the window, calculating next moves. By the time I walked up the driveway of my parents' colonial home, the sun had set, casting long shadows. I unlocked the door and stepped inside. It smelled of catering and fresh lilies. From the formal dining room, I could hear crystal glasses and the booming laugh of Bradley. My parents were hosting a dinner for his wealthy family, undoubtedly discussing wedding expenses paid for with my stolen inheritance. I did not storm into the dining room. I did not scream, throw plates, or demand answers. Confrontation without leverage was a fool's game, and I was dealing with professional manipulators. If I confronted them now, they would deny it, hide the remaining assets, and gaslight me. I needed undeniable evidence, and I needed total surprise. I quietly walked past the dining room, my footsteps muffled by the Persian rugs. I climbed the stairs to my pale blue childhood bedroom for the very last time. I pulled a duffel bag from my closet. I did not pack clothes or sentimental items. I only packed what I needed to build my empire. I took my birth certificate, social security card, medical degrees, and a silver locket my grandmother had given me. I retrieved every financial document I could find, slipping them into my portfolio. I wanted to leave no trace of my existence in this house. As I zipped the bag closed, I took one final look around the room that had been my prison. I felt absolutely nothing. No grief, no hesitation, no lingering attachment. The people downstairs were not my family. They were ruthless parasites. I slung the bag over my shoulder and walked back downstairs. The dining room door was slightly ajar. I could hear my mother fawning over Bradley's mother, boasting about Serena's impeccable taste. "She deserves a perfect start in life," my mother declared proudly. The hypocrisy tasted like ash, but I swallowed it down. I walked out the front door, the mahogany wood clicking shut behind me. I stood on the wooden front porch, the freezing night air biting sharply at my cheeks. I pulled out my cell phone and permanently disconnected my number. I dropped the SIM card into a storm drain. From this moment forward, the desperate daughter they knew was dead. I stepped into the dark street, still wearing the bleached blazer Serena had ruined. I was going to keep it safely hidden away as a permanent reminder of their betrayal. 10 years from now, when I finally returned to burn their manufactured world to the ground, I would wear it as a monument to their spectacular downfall. 10 years is a lifetime when you spend every single waking second building an empire from the ashes of your betrayal. The frightened medical student shivering on a wooden porch no longer existed. In her place stood Dr. Kira Vance Washington, the most demanded neurosurgeon on the Eastern Seaboard and the uncompromising chief executive officer of my global corporation. I stood under the glaring surgical lights of my private operating theater in Manhattan, a customized scalpel resting lightly in my gloved hand. The steady rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor was the only sound permitted in the completely sterile room. I was performing a complex tumor resection that 3 other top surgeons had previously deemed inoperable. My hands moved with absolute brutal precision. There was no hesitation and no wasted movement. I navigated the delicate neural pathways with a cold certainty that always left my attending residents in speechless awe. I excised the final microscopic margin of the tumor, stepped back from the operating table, and stripped off my bloody gloves. The gallery above the theater erupted into quiet, reverent applause. I did not look up to acknowledge them. Success was not a surprise to me anymore. It was guaranteed. My medical dominance was only one half of the entire equation. Upon securing my grandmother's trust fund with the help of a ruthless estate lawyer 10 years ago, I did not just passively collect the patent royalties, I aggressively weaponized them. I poured the recovered millions into establishing my own biotechnology firm, developing advanced neurological repair devices that revolutionized post-operative recovery. My massive company held exclusive manufacturing rights, making our innovations a mighty biotech juggernaut valued well over $900 million. I commanded a private skyscraper in the financial district, employing hundreds of brilliant minds. I owned the building. I stepped out of the surgical wing, trading my hospital scrubs for a tailored charcoal designer suit that cost more than my parents' first mortgage. A sleek private elevator carried me directly to the top floor of my corporate headquarters. The glass walls of my corner office offered a panoramic view of the city skyline, a constant reminder of the heights I had conquered. My assistant, a fiercely efficient woman named Elena, handed me an espresso and a thick leather binder as I walked through the grand double doors. I strode straight to the black marble conference table inside. Here, 6 senior executives were waiting. They immediately stopped talking and stood up the second I entered the room. I motioned for them to sit and slammed the binder down. We were currently negotiating the hostile takeover of a rival pharmaceutical supplier. Their chief executive had recently tried to leverage our supply chain, desperately attempting to corner me into a highly disadvantageous contract. I did not ever negotiate with foolish extortionists. I simply bought their debt and crushed them. Execute the acquisition immediately, I ordered, my voice cutting through the quiet boardroom. Strip their board of directors entirely. One executive hesitated. He adjusted his silk tie nervously. Dr. Vance Washington, their legal team, is officially threatening to file an antitrust injunction if we proceed with the liquidation. I offered a cold, humorless smile. I pressed a silver button on my intercom, summoning my lead corporate counsel, a terrifyingly sharp lawyer named Marcus Sterling. Marcus was a ruthless legal predator who charged $2,000 an hour and absolutely never lost a case. He walked confidently into the large room carrying a slim digital tablet. Marcus, I said, not taking my eyes off the highly nervous executive sitting directly across the table. Address the injunction threat for the board. Marcus smirked, placing the expensive tablet flat on the mahogany table. Already handled. We meticulously identified 3 major corporate violations in their quarterly financial filings from last year. I personally informed their counsel that we would immediately forward the glaring discrepancies to federal regulators unless they drop the injunction and surrender their voting rights immediately. They cowardly conceded 10 minutes ago. I nodded approvingly. That was exactly why I kept an incredibly aggressive legal team on a massive permanent retainer. I paid heavily for absolute victory, and they delivered it flawlessly every time. My staggering wealth and corporate power completely insulated me from the mundane struggles of ordinary life, but I never allowed immense luxury to soften my sharp focus. I owned a sprawling modern penthouse overlooking Central Park, a sleek fleet of luxury vehicles, and a private jet that comfortably allowed me to attend international medical conferences at a brief moment's notice. I moved invisibly through the elite upper echelons of society. I carefully operated under my hyphenated surname, entirely disconnected from the pathetic family that threw me away. They remained ignorant of my existence, however, I knew absolutely everything about theirs. For 10 years, I had quietly employed private investigators to monitor their financial maneuvers, waiting patiently for the perfect moment. I watched Serena strut around country clubs parading the stolen wealth while her arrogant husband mismanaged his fragile business. I watched my parents remortgage their colonial home repeatedly to desperately fund the golden child's expanding deficits. They believed they had won. They believed they had completely erased me. Yet, every single night when I returned to my pristine, quiet home, I deliberately bypassed the expensive artwork and the imported designer furniture. I walked straight into my massive walk-in wardrobe space. I always stared at the far wall. Hanging entirely alone in a heavily reinforced glass display case was the black blazer permanently stained with chaotic rusted orange bleach marks. It was my daily reminder of their extreme treachery. I did not keep it out of sadness or foolish nostalgia. I kept it because revenge is a dish that requires cold, meticulous preparation. The trap I had spent a decade building was finally complete. My parents and my sister were standing blindly on a trapdoor, and my hand was hovering directly over the heavy iron lever. The endgame had officially begun. The next morning, the catalyst for their destruction arrived on my glass desk. My assistant Elena walked into my office carrying the morning correspondence. She placed a heavy envelope right in the center of my blotter. The envelope was crafted from thick cream paper sealed with gold wax, stamped with a pretentious crest. It screamed of desperation masquerading as wealth. I picked up a silver letter opener and sliced through the paper. Inside rested a lavishly embossed invitation. The gold foil lettering jumped off the page announcing the spectacular 5-year anniversary gala for Bradley's technology startup. The venue was an excessively expensive luxury hotel in the heart of Manhattan. The guest list undoubtedly included the most affluent socialites and influential investors on the East Coast. My parents and Serena were listed as the proud co-hosts of the evening. They were parading their stolen success right in my city. I stared at the shimmering gold text, a cold smile spreading across my face. They had sent this invitation to my corporate headquarters, addressing it to Dr. Kira Vance Washington. They still had no idea that the titan of the biotechnology industry they were desperately trying to impress was the exact same daughter they had thrown away, like garbage, a decade ago. They were inviting the executioner into their own house. I tossed the gaudy invitation across the desk and pressed the intercom button. I summoned my chief financial officer, David Thorne. David possessed an unnatural ability to dissect corporate structures and expose the rotting foundations underneath any business. He entered my office 3 minutes later carrying his encrypted laptop. I pointed to the gold-embossed invitation resting on the glass table. "David," I commanded smoothly, "I need you to launch a completely invasive financial autopsy on this company. I want to know every single detail about their cash flow, outstanding liabilities, and their private equity structure. Leave absolutely no stone unturned." David glanced at the name on the card and nodded once. "Consider it done, Dr. Washington. I will have a comprehensive dossier on your desk before the market closes today." Howe was true to his word. At exactly 4 o'clock that afternoon, David returned to my office. He placed a thick red file directly in front of me and took a seat opposite my desk. "It is a complete house of cards," David stated bluntly, leaning back in his chair. "A textbook illusion. Their 5-year anniversary gala is nothing but a desperate smokescreen. The company is bleeding cash at an unprecedented rate." I opened the red file, my eyes scanning the meticulously organized financial spreadsheets. The numbers told a story of staggering incompetence and reckless vanity. Bradley had burned through the stolen $5 million from my trust fund within the first 3 years, squandering it on expensive office leases, luxury company cars, and exorbitant salaries for himself and his incompetent friends. "Walk me through the exact deficits," I said, flipping to a page highlighted in bright yellow. "How close are they to total collapse?" David leaned forward, tapping a manicured finger on a specific column of numbers. They are currently carrying $15 million in toxic debt. They have defaulted on their last 3 commercial loan payments. Their primary vendors have placed them on strict cash-only terms, and they are facing massive supply chain shortages because they cannot pay their shipping invoices. But the worst part is the fraud. I looked up from the dossier, my interest sharply piqued. Fraud, explain. Bradley has been aggressively cooking the books. David explained, his voice dropping slightly. He has been inflating his projected revenue streams to secure short-term loans from predatory private equity firms. He is falsifying quarterly reports to pacify his current investors. It is a direct violation of federal securities laws. If the Securities and Exchange Commission glances at these ledgers, he will face severe federal indictments. I leaned back in my leather chair, absorbing the magnificent reality of their impending doom. Bradley was not a successful entrepreneur. He was a spectacular failure, drowning in an ocean of lies, trying to bail out a sinking ship with a golden bucket. This lavish gala was his last attempt to project stability, aiming to lure in a new wave of investors, to keep his fraudulent scheme alive for a few more months. My parents had stolen my grandmother's legacy to fund a criminal enterprise managed by an arrogant fool. They are completely vulnerable, I murmured, tracing the edge of the financial report. They are cornered animals trying to put on a luxury parade. They are effectively bankrupt, David confirmed with a sharp nod. The primary private equity firm holding their largest loan is preparing to issue a final notice of default by the end of this month. When that happens, the entire company goes into immediate receivership. The assets will be liquidated, and the personal guarantees Bradley signed will ruin him and anyone attached to him. I closed the red file, the satisfying thud echoing in the quiet office. The irony was exquisite. My parents had sacrificed my medical career to buy their way into a privileged family, and now that same family was about to drag them down into absolute financial ruin. David, I said, my voice steady and cold, I want you to contact that private equity firm immediately. I want you to initiate a discreet buyout of Bradley's entire debt portfolio. Use whatever leverage or premium is necessary, but do it quietly through our anonymous holding companies. David's eyes widened slightly in realization. You want to buy their debt? You want to become their sole creditor? Exactly, I replied. By the time I walk into that gala, I will own every single asset they possess. Secure the debt, David. Leave no loose ends. David nodded, closing his laptop. It will be finalized by tomorrow morning. He quietly left the office. The financial trap was fully set and they were blind. The sharp ring of my cellular line shattered the quiet, tense atmosphere. I glanced at the caller identification flashing across the screen on my desk. It was an unrecognized phone number from the state of Connecticut. I rarely answered unknown calls, but my intuition whispered this was the unfolding game. I pressed the green icon, maintaining total control. Hello, I answered, my voice a mask of polite neutrality. Kira, is that you? The aggressively cheerful voice was instantly recognizable. 10 years of silence had not altered the grating pitch of my younger sister, Serena. She spoke with the breathless urgency of a woman who believed her existence was a gift to everyone listening. Yes, I replied, leaning back in my leather chair. I swiveled to look out over the Manhattan skyline, feeling a wave of dark amusement. She had no idea she was calling the top floor of a skyscraper I owned. It has been ages, Serena declared, glossing over how they drove me out a decade ago. I had to dig through 3 public directories to find this number. I thought you had fallen off the earth. Did you receive the invitation to our anniversary gala? We sent it to your registered mailing address. She sent it to my corporate headquarters, assuming it was a random building where I worked as a nameless assistant. I received a flashy piece of mail this morning. I confirmed, keeping my tone flat. Flashy, it is gold leaf, she corrected, her voice dripping with condescension. We imported the paper from Italy. Bradley insisted on the absolute best for our corporate anniversary. His company is doing incredibly well. We are dominating the tech sector. The gala is going to be the social event of the season, packed with billionaires. The audacity of her delusion was impressive. She was bragging about dominating the tech sector while I had the financial dossier proving they were defaulting on commercial loans right on my desk. That sounds very busy, I said, playing the part of the intimidated sister. It is exhausting being this successful, Serena sighed. We just returned from the Maldives and Bradley bought me a new Porsche. Keeping up with our social circle is a full-time job. Speaking of jobs, that is actually why I am calling you today. We want to help you. Is that so? I asked, allowing a hint of feigned curiosity into my voice. Yes, Bradley and I were talking last night. Serena continued, adopting a tone of deep artificial pity. His parents are very heavily involved in philanthropic work. They strongly believe that those of us blessed with extreme wealth have a strict moral obligation to give back to the less fortunate. Bradley brought up your situation. We both know you have been struggling since you dropped out of the medical race. We cannot have Bradley's influential parents thinking we abandon our struggling relatives. It looks terrible for our public relations. I remained entirely silent, leaning forward and resting my elbows on the glass desk, letting her continue to dig her own grave. So, Serena announced proudly, Bradley is willing to offer you a position at a private wellness clinic owned by one of his closest fraternity brothers. It is a receptionist job. You would be answering phones, scheduling appointments, and fetching coffee for the actual doctors. The pay is basically minimum wage, but the clinic is located in a very wealthy neighborhood. You could network. Consider it a massive favor. It is better than whatever dead-end retail job you are currently working. She was offering me a renowned neurosurgeon and biotechnology chief executive officer, a minimum wage job fetching coffee out of misplaced charity. The insult was so misguided that it bordered on comedic genius. A receptionist, I repeated, slowly, tasting the profound ignorance in her words. Do not sound ungrateful, Kira. Serena snapped, her fake sweetness instantly vanishing. Bradley is sticking his neck out for you. We are trying to lift you out of your pathetic circumstances. But if you are going to take this job, we need to establish some very strict ground rules about your presentation. My presentation? I prompted, thoroughly enjoying her downward spiral into absolute narcissism. Yes, your appearance, she stated ruthlessly. If you are going to work for Bradley's friends, or if you actually show up to our gala, you cannot dress like you normally do. You always had a cheap, depressing fashion sense. I still cringed thinking about that thrift store jacket you tried to wear to your medical interview. Do not embarrass us by showing up looking like a homeless person. Go to a discount department store and buy something decent. If you need a small loan for a cheap dress, I can authorize my accountant to send you $200. She had just handed me the absolute perfect psychological weapon. She actively brought up the blazer. She deliberately reminded me of the bleach, the cruelty, and the sabotage. You do not need to send me any money, Serena, I replied, my voice dropping an octave, resonating with a cold, terrifying authority that she was too dense to recognize. I have my wardrobe entirely handled. I already know exactly what I'm going to wear to your anniversary gala. Well, make sure it is highly appropriate, she demanded, remaining completely oblivious to the impending threat. The dress code is strict black tie. Do not ruin my perfect night. I will see you on Saturday. Do not be late. The phone line clicked dead. I lowered the receiver, deliberately placing it on my desk. I stood up and walked over to the window. Serena genuinely thought she was throwing a lifeline to a drowning rat. She had absolutely no idea she had just invited a great white shark into her fragile, sinking house. The financial trap was locked in place. It was time to prepare the ultimate devastating bait. I needed absolute leverage. The next morning, I walked straight into the financial war room. David Thorne was standing by the interactive market displays. Status report, I demanded, looking at the red-lined graphs mapping Bradley's impending doom. The private equity firm holding their primary loans was eager to offload the risk, David replied, pulling up a digital contract. We purchased the entire $15 million debt portfolio at a heavy discount through your blind trust Obsidian Holdings. The transfer is fully complete and legally binding. I reviewed the signatures. It was beautiful. Bradley had no idea his loans were sold. He prepared to host a lavish anniversary gala, ignorant of the fact that I now personally owned his corporate headquarters, intellectual property, and servers. If he missed a single payment which he already had, I possessed unilateral authority to seize his assets, terminate his employment, and liquidate his entire operation. Draft the foreclosure notices, I instructed David. Prepare the cease and desist orders. Have our forensic accounting team ready to submit his falsified revenue reports to the Securities and Exchange Commission the exact second I give the signal. We are stripping him of his freedom. David nodded. Everything will be locked and loaded for Saturday night, Dr. Washington. The financial execution was arranged, but I required a visual execution to accompany it. Serena had commanded me not to embarrass her. She mocked the destroyed blazer that almost cost me my medical career. I walked into my vault wardrobe, punching the security code into the keypad. The heavy door hissed open. I reached inside and pulled out the black jacket. The rusted orange and burnt white bleach stains were harsh, ugly, and chaotic. They represented weakness, poverty, and betrayal. I was going to turn them into a masterpiece. I called Julian Vance a highly exclusive fashion designer. Julian owed me his life. I successfully removed a malignant tumor from his spine when every other neurosurgeon said he would be paralyzed. He answered immediately. Julian, I said smoothly, I require a custom garment for a black tie gala this Saturday. I have the foundational piece, but it requires a resurrection. Within 2 hours, Julian stood in my penthouse living room with his top seamstress. When I laid the bleach-stained 10-year-old blazer on my kitchen island, Julian stared in profound confusion. Kira, my darling, Julian murmured. This is ruined polyester. It is covered in toxic chemical burns. You want me to dress you for a high society gala in a biohazard disaster. Make it a weapon, I corrected him. I want to wear this exact jacket. I want the original bleach stains prominently displayed. But the garment must scream of terrifying wealth and untouchable power. Rip it apart, restructure the shoulders to be sharp and imposing, tailor the waist to fit like a second skin. Take these ugly orange bleach marks and outline them in pure gold thread. Embed black Swarovski crystals into the undamaged fabric so the damaged parts look like intentional, aggressive art. Make it look like I am wearing my battle scars wrapped in millions. Julian's initial horror slowly melted into absolute creative obsession. He ran his expert hands over the ruined lapels, a juxtaposition of trauma and extreme luxury. He whispered, his eyes widening with excitement. We will line the inside with blood-red silk. We will extend the hemline into a sweeping tail. We will encrust the borders of these chemical burns with crushed obsidian and gold leaf. It will be the most intimidating piece of haute couture Manhattan has seen. For 48 hours, Julian and his team worked relentlessly inside my penthouse. They meticulously disassembled the cheap blazer, preserving the exact pattern of Serena's malicious bleach attack. They fortified the cheap polyester with heavy premium structural backing. They sewed thousands of tiny glittering black crystals into the dark fabric, making the jacket shimmer like a midnight sky. The jagged, ugly bleach stains were painstakingly traced and amplified with thick metallic gold embroidery, transforming the stains into what looked like veins of molten lava erupting through the fabric. When Julian finally helped me slip into the reconstructed jacket on Friday evening, I stared at my reflection. The transformation was breathtaking. I paired it with a sleek, minimalist black silk gown that pooled elegantly around my feet, allowing the avant-garde blazer to completely dominate the entire silhouette. The sharp, structured shoulders made me look like a warlord. The gold-threaded bleach stains blazed across my chest and arm, an undeniable, screaming testament to the night my family tried to break me. I looked incredibly wealthy, fiercely beautiful, and deeply dangerous. Julian stepped back, clasping his hands in pure reverence. You look like a goddess of vengeance, he breathed. It is terrifyingly perfect. I adjusted the high collar, the blood-red silk lining flashing briefly against my skin. It is exactly what they ordered, I whispered, a cold smile playing on my lips. My financial trap was fully armed, ready to crush Bradley's fraudulent empire. My armor was meticulously forged, wearing the very trauma they inflicted upon me as a badge of absolute superiority. They wanted me to show up and blend into the background as their pathetic, struggling relative. They expected a broken, awkward girl desperate for their wealthy charity. I was going to give them a merciless titan. Saturday morning arrived with a heavy electric tension in the air. I instructed my private chauffeur to prepare the black Rolls-Royce for the evening. I sat in my home office drinking dark coffee. I checked my encrypted tablet one time, verifying that the legal foreclosure documents were locked loaded and awaiting my final command. The board was completely set. The pieces were moving. I was absolutely ready to walk right into their gilded cage and burn it down from the inside out. My Rolls-Royce glided to a halt on the cobblestone driveway of the luxury Manhattan hotel. The glass venue doors glowed warmly, illuminating the red carpet rolled out specifically for Bradley's 5-year anniversary gala. Valets rushed forward to open car doors for the arriving billionaires, venture capitalists, and society elites. My private driver stepped out and opened my rear door. I stepped onto the carpet, the cool night air instantly hitting the exposed silk of my black gown. The heavy, reconstructed fabric of the bleached blazer rested perfectly on my sharp shoulders. The crushed obsidian crystals embedded in the dark material caught the light sparkling like a violent constellation. I walked past the flashing cameras, my expression unreadable. I bypassed the coat check and handed my gold invitation to the concierge standing at the ballroom entrance. He glanced at the thick card, then looked up at my outfit. His trained professional smile immediately faltered. His eyes snagged on the molten gold embroidery outlining the chaotic bleach stains. He quickly recovered, pushing open the heavy double doors to announce my arrival. The ballroom was a masterpiece of excessive, desperate spending. Massive crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, casting a warm glow over dozens of round tables. Towering centerpieces of white orchids blocked the sightlines across the expansive room. A live string quartet played a classical arrangement in the far corner, trying to inject an air of old-money sophistication into Bradley's fraudulent empire. The room was packed with guests wearing traditional safe luxury. Men in identical tuxedos and women in muted designer gowns sipped champagne. They looked like carbon copies desperately trying to blend into the rigid hierarchy of the elite class. I stepped over the threshold, the sweeping tail of my red silk lining trailing behind me. I did not slink into the room. I walked directly into the center of the grand space, my posture demanding absolute attention from everyone present. The effect was instantaneous and completely undeniable. The low hum of conversations died out in ripples starting from the doors and spreading outward like a shockwave. Heads turned slowly, glasses paused halfway to mouths. The string quartet continued playing, but the elegant notes felt entirely out of place against the suffocating silence descending upon the crowd. Bradley's elitist relatives, a collective of generational wealth who prided themselves on quiet conformity, stared at me with unconcealed horror. I walked past a cluster of older women dripping in diamond necklaces. One of them gasped loudly, raising a manicured hand to her chest. Her eyes were fixed firmly on the sprawling, rusted orange bleach marks. I heard her harsh whisper cut through the quiet air. She asked her companion if security had accidentally let a homeless person wander inside. Her companion scoffed, muttering that it looked like I had crawled out of a dumpster and wrapped myself in a chemical hazard. A group of venture capitalists standing near the bar turned their backs to me, shaking their heads in profound disgust. They muttered about the blatant disrespect of my attire, completely failing to recognize Julian's precision tailoring. They only saw the aggressive, jagged stains marring the fabric. They saw poverty and a severe lack of social grace. They saw a glaring disruption to their carefully manufactured aesthetic. The cruel whispers multiplied rapidly, echoing off the marble pillars lining the room. They called my outfit a pathetic cry for attention and an insult to the black-tie dress code. I absorbed every single hateful whisper, every condescending glare, and every scoff of absolute revulsion. It did not hurt me at all. It fed my determination and solidified my immense power. I kept my chin level, my eyes scanning the room like a predator analyzing panicking prey. The gold thread woven into the bleach stains glinted brightly, a brilliant reflection of my untouchable wealth hiding right in front of their ignorant faces. Near the front of the room, positioned right next to the grand presentation stage, stood the guest of honor. Bradley was holding a heavy glass of expensive scotch, completely surrounded by his sycophantic board of directors. Serena was clinging tightly to his arm, wearing a predictable, overly embellished silver gown that screamed of trying entirely too hard to fit in. My parents, Helen and Marcus, stood just a few feet away from them, desperately attempting to mingle casually with Bradley's wealthy parents. It was Serena who spotted my arrival first. She had been mid-laugh, tossing her blonde hair over her shoulder, when her eyes met mine across the crowded, tense ballroom. The artificial smile on her face instantly vanished, replaced by an expression of pure, unadulterated terror. Her jaw dropped open in disbelief. She released Bradley's arm and took a frantic step forward, her eyes locked completely onto the exact same bleach stains she had maliciously poured onto my blazer 10 years ago. She recognized the destroyed garment immediately. The terrifying memory of that night flashed vividly across her horrified features. Bradley noticed her sudden panic and followed her gaze through the parted crowd. When he saw me standing there, his smug, arrogant expression morphed into deep, overwhelming revulsion. He leaned down and hissed something angry into Serena's ear, his face flushing bright red with extreme embarrassment. My parents turned around together to see what had caused the sudden, undeniable commotion. My mother dropped her expensive champagne flute directly onto the floor. The delicate crystal shattered loudly against the polished marble, the sharp sound echoing violently through the incredibly tense room. My father grabbed her arm, his face draining of all color as he stared at the living embodiment of the daughter they had completely thrown away. They looked absolutely horrified that their greatest hidden shame was standing proudly in the exact middle of their greatest manufactured triumph. I stopped walking, planting my feet firmly and confidently in the very center of the massive ballroom. I stared directly into my mother's terrified eyes, offering her a slow, chilling smile. The spell of silence broke the moment Bradley shoved his way through the cluster of gaping socialites. He marched across the polished marble floor toward me, his face a tight mask of barely contained fury. The ice cubes in his heavy crystal glass clinked violently against the sides, betraying the aggressive speed of his approach. He wore a midnight blue tuxedo that was undeniably expensive, yet it sat awkwardly on his frame, projecting the stiff, unyarned confidence of a man who had never been told no in his entire life. He stopped barely 2 feet in front of me, attempting to use his height to physically intimidate me. He reeked of cheap cologne and aged scotch. The guests surrounding us took a collective step backward, forming a wide, expectant circle around the impending collision. They were desperate to watch the wealthy host put the disruptive, poorly dressed intruder back in her rightful place. "What in the absolute hell do you think you are doing?" Bradley hissed, his voice low but vibrating with raw malice. He gestured aggressively with his free hand toward my heavily embellished blazer. "We explicitly told you the dress code for this evening was strict black tie. Instead, you deliberately crashed my corporate anniversary, looking like you rummaged through a hazardous waste bin. This is not a charity kitchen, Kira. You are actively embarrassing my family, you are humiliating your sister, and you are disrespecting my investors. I should have security throw you out onto the street right now." I did not flinch. I did not step back. I simply looked up at him, my expression radiating absolute icy boredom. The heavy silence in the room amplified his pathetic attempt at dominance. "I am wearing a custom piece," I replied, my voice smooth and perfectly modulated to carry to the eager ears of the eavesdropping crowd. "It represents a very specific part of my history. I thought you of all people would appreciate the aesthetic of ruined things trying to pass as valuable." Bradley scoffed loudly, shaking his head in profound disbelief. He took a sip of his scotch, swirling the amber liquid, as he looked down his nose at me. The sheer, suffocating weight of his white privilege radiated from his pores. He looked at me not as a person, but as a pitiful stray dog that had dared to walk onto his pristine property. "You are completely delusional," he sneered, leaning closer so only I and the immediate bystanders could hear his venom. "Serena warned me. You had lost your grip on reality after failing out of the medical race. But this is pathetic. We actually tried to throw you a lifeline. I went out of my way to convince my fraternity brother to give you a job at his clinic." A nice quiet receptionist role where you could sit behind a desk, answer phones, and maybe learn some basic professional etiquette from real doctors. He shifted his weight, his tone shifting from angry to deeply nauseatingly patronizing. You really need to understand how the world actually works, Kira. Let us be brutally honest here. A black woman with a massive chip on her shoulder, no professional connections, and a blatant inability to follow simple social rules is an absolute liability in the corporate world. My family has spent generations building a flawless reputation. I was willing to use that pristine reputation to vouch for you. I was willing to overlook your aggressive attitude and give you a stepping stone because Serena cried and begged me to help her poor struggling sister. You should be down on your knees thanking me for handing you an opportunity you could never possibly earn on your own. The sheer audacity of his lecture was mesmerizing. He was a fraud drowning in $15 million of toxic debt, standing in a rented ballroom, lecturing a billionaire neurosurgeon about how the world worked. He genuinely believed that his skin color, his gender, and his stolen wealth automatically made him my superior. He expected me to bow my head, apologize for my presence, and gratefully accept the scraps he was tossing from his crumbling table. You think you are being generous? I stated, my voice dangerously soft. You think offering me a minimum wage job fetching coffee is an act of noble philanthropy. You look at me and you see a charity case. I see a failure who refuses to accept her place. Bradley shot back, his lip curling in disgust. You have always been jealous of Serena. She married into success. She knows how to navigate elite circles. She knows how to behave. You chose to be difficult, and now you are facing the consequences of your stubbornness. I am giving you exactly one chance to turn around, walk out those doors, and go back to whatever miserable apartment you crawled out of. If you leave quietly right now, I might still make that phone call and secure that receptionist job for you. If you stay and cause a scene, I will personally guarantee that you never find employment in this city again. Do you understand me? I tilted my head, studying the frantic pulse beating wildly in his neck. He was terrified. Beneath the bravado and the elitist threats, the pressure of his impending financial doom was eating him alive. He needed this gala to be flawless, because it was the only thing standing between him and federal prison. I understand you perfectly, Bradley, I replied, my voice echoing clearly in the silent ballroom. I understand exactly who you are, what you have taken, and precisely what you owe. I do not need your fake charity, and I certainly do not need your permission to occupy this space. I am exactly where I am supposed to be. Bradley gripped his glass, his knuckles turning completely white. He opened his mouth to unleash another tirade, but before he could utter a single syllable, my parents suddenly rushed frantically toward us. My mother grabbed my elbow with a desperate grip. Her manicured nails dug sharply into my skin through the silk sleeve of my gown. She did not say a word to Bradley or the staring guests. She simply yanked me backward with surprising physical force. My father stepped instantly to my other side. His broad frame blocked the view of the curious socialites. Together they physically corralled me away from the center of the ballroom. I allowed them to guide me. My face was a mask of absolute calm. This private ambush was exactly the next phase I had anticipated. They dragged me down a long, carpeted corridor away from the main event. The loud classical music and the harsh murmurs of the wealthy crowd faded into a dull hum. My father pushed open a heavy oak door marked as a private lounge. He shoved me inside and quickly locked the deadbolt behind us. The room was dimly lit. It smelled strongly of expensive cigar smoke and leather furniture. The sheer silence of the space felt heavy and oppressive. All the fake camera-ready smiles immediately vanished from my parents' faces. The polite societal masks they wore just completely dissolved. This revealed the ruthless, calculating predators hiding underneath. My mother paced the length of the Persian rug. Her hands shook with unfiltered rage. "Have you completely lost your mind?" she hissed. Her voice vibrated with intense venom. "You disappear for a decade. Then you choose tonight to resurface. You walk into the most important night of your sister's life, looking like a deranged vagrant covered in bleach stains. What is wrong with you, Kira?" I stood perfectly still in the center of the room. I was invited, Helen, I replied. I refuse to call her mother. I am simply attending a corporate event. Do not play games with me, my father growled. He marched over to a heavy mahogany table and slammed his leather briefcase down on the polished wood. You are not here to celebrate. You are here to cause trouble because you have always been a bitter, jealous disappointment. But your childish tantrum ends right now. We do not have time for your pathetic rebellion. You are going to do exactly what we tell you to do. Then you are going to leave through the service elevator. He snapped the latches of his briefcase open. He pulled out a thick stack of legal documents printed on heavy parchment paper. He slapped a gold pen on top of the stack. He pushed it across the table toward me. Sit down and sign these, he commanded. His tone left absolutely zero room for negotiation. I glanced down at the papers without moving. The bold black letters at the top of the page clearly read, "Irrevocable power of attorney and deed transfer." It was a legal mandate designed to completely surrender the ownership of a specific property. "What is this?" I asked. I kept my voice completely devoid of any emotion. "It is the deed to the undeveloped land upstate," my mother snapped. She stopped her frantic pacing to glare at me. "The parcel your grandmother stubbornly left in your name before she died. We need it. You are going to sign full legal control over to your father right now." I looked at the two of them. I was genuinely mesmerized by the sheer depth of their depravity. They had already stolen my $5 million trust fund. They had already hijacked my medical patents. Now, 10 years later, the very first thing they do upon seeing my face is demand the absolute last scrap of my grandmother's legacy. "You want me to sign over my land," I stated flatly. "Why?" My father slammed his hand hard against the mahogany table. "Because Bradley needs immediate capital. You are going to provide it," he barked. "His company is experiencing a temporary cash flow issue. The bank requires additional collateral to approve an emergency bridge loan. That land is sitting there completely useless. We are going to leverage the deed. We will mortgage the property and inject the cash directly into his corporate accounts." "You are stealing my land to bail out your son-in-law," I asked. "It is not stealing," my mother shrieked. Her face turned an ugly shade of crimson. "It is family duty. Bradley is a white man from an established, highly respected family. He is building a massive technological empire. He is giving Serena the elite lifestyle she absolutely deserves. He is actually doing something important with his life." "What are you doing, Kira? You are a single black woman with no husband and no children. You clearly have no money if you are wearing that ruined trash. You do not need land. You do not need assets. You owe this family for raising you." The raw, unfiltered racism and intense misogyny pouring out of my own mother's mouth was breathtaking. They viewed me entirely as a disposable resource. They believed my entire existence was meant to be mined and harvested. I was just a sacrifice to pave a golden road for their privileged son-in-law and their favorite spoiled daughter. "Bradley is a monumental failure," I said. My voice cut through the dim room like a surgical blade. "His company is collapsing under $15 million of toxic debt. He is a fraud. You want me to hand over my grandmother's land to plug a sinking ship?" "Shut your mouth," my father roared. He took a threatening step toward me. "You know nothing about corporate finance. Bradley is a visionary. He just needs a temporary lifeline. You are going to sign this document right now. Or I swear to God I will make sure you never find peace in this city. I will personally ruin whatever miserable little life you have scraped together. You are nothing but a stepping stone for your sister's success. Sign the paper, Kira." They stood there breathing heavily. I smiled. The smile I gave them was not born of joy. It was the calculated exposure of teeth from a predator that had finally backed its prey into a corner. I slowly reached into the hidden pocket of my silk gown and pressed the tactile button on my mobile device. A faint vibration against my hip confirmed that the audio recorder was actively capturing every syllable spoken in this room, and me inside this isolated, soundproofed room. I was going to let them dig a grave so deep they would never see sunlight again. "You think this is funny?" my father shouted. His fists clenched at his sides as his face twisted into a mask of pure hatred. "You arrogant, ungrateful little wretch. We are offering you a chance to finally do something useful with your pathetic life. Serena is a spectacular success. She is the crown jewel of this family. She married a visionary. She elevated our entire bloodline. And what have you done? You vanished for 10 years because you were too weak to handle the pressure of real expectations. I vanished because you stole $5 million from me, I stated clearly. I needed their verbal confirmation on the digital record. I kept my voice perfectly even, projecting the exact volume needed for the microphone to pick up the acoustic bounce. You and Helen abused your legal guardianship. You illegally liquidated the irrevocable trust fund my grandmother established exclusively for my medical education. You took my inheritance and handed it to a white man so your favorite daughter could play pretend in high society. My mother let out a shrill shriek of laughter. Stole? We did not steal anything, Kira. We reallocated wasted resources. You were never going to make it as a surgeon. You lack the grace and the connections to survive in elite medical circles. Your grandmother was a senile old fool who did not understand how the world operates. We took that money because Bradley actually needed seed capital to build a real corporate empire. We invested in a guaranteed winner. We secured Serena's future. You should be thanking us for protecting the family name instead of whining about money you never deserved. The audio recorder captured her entire confession. It was flawless, unadulterated grand larceny, completely justified by her breathtaking narcissistic delusions. I needed my father to completely incriminate himself right here and right now. So you admit it, I prompted calmly. You admit that you committed wire fraud and grand theft, and now you want me to sign over my final physical asset so Bradley can mortgage it to cover up his catastrophic financial failures. My father slammed both hands violently onto the mahogany table. It is not fraud. It is called aggressive wealth management. Bradley is experiencing a minor quarterly deficit. We just need collateral to satisfy commercial lenders for a bridge loan until his next venture capital round closes. You are going to sign this deed transfer right now. If you refuse, I will call my contacts at every medical board in this state. I will tell them you are severely mentally unstable. I will destroy your reputation. You will never hold a decent job again. You are a vicious, bitter failure, my mother added, stepping closer to me with her finger pointed sharply at my chest. You are deliberately trying to ruin this gala because you are insanely jealous that Serena has a perfect husband, immense wealth, and the absolute adoration of this family. Look at you. Look at this disgusting cheap jacket you dragged out of the garbage. You are wearing bleach stains to a black tie event just to throw a tantrum. You have always been an embarrassment. Sign the paper. Do your duty for once in your miserable life and then get out of our sight. I looked down at the heavy parchment paper resting on the polished wood. The gold pen sat perfectly aligned next to the signature line. They were so blinded by their desperate greed that they could not see the monumental trap closing shut around their throats. They genuinely believed their threats carried weight. They foolishly thought I was still the terrified 23-year-old medical student sobbing alone over a completely ruined black blazer. I reached out and picked up the gold pen. My mother let out a loud, triumphant breath. My father's rigid shoulders dropped a fraction of an inch as a smug, victorious grin spread across his aging face. They thought they had broken me again. They thought their emotional abuse had successfully crushed my spirit. I held the pen between my fingers, feeling the cool metal. Then, with a sudden fluid motion, I snapped the expensive pen completely in half. Ink splattered across the deed transfer, ruining the legal document instantly. My mother screamed loudly. My father lunged forward, but I took a swift step back, maintaining my perfect composure. My grandmother's land remains exactly where it belongs, I said, my voice dripping with absolute freezing authority. And Bradley's pathetic company will burn to the ground. You wanted a stepping stone, Marcus. You just stepped on a landmine. I turned my back on them. I did not run. I walked to the heavy oak door with measured, powerful strides. I unlocked the deadbolt and pulled the door open. The classical music and the loud murmurs of the wealthy gala guests flooded back into my ears. My parents were screaming behind me, shouting vile curses and demanding I come back. I deliberately ignored them completely and kept moving. I stepped out into the carpeted corridor, leaving them trapped in the dark room with their ruined document and their shattered delusions. I slowly smoothed the lapels of my brilliant avant-garde blazer. The audio recording was safely secured in my pocket. It was now time to return to the main banquet hall. It was finally time to pull the heavy iron lever and watch them all fall. I walked back into the grand ballroom, letting the heavy door click shut behind me. The extravagant space buzzed with heightened anticipation. Waiters in crisp white jackets circulated with silver trays of champagne, navigating the sea of expensive tuxedos. I moved through the crowd with measured, deliberate steps. The guests who previously whispered cruel insults about my blazer now parted silently, sensing the dangerous shift in my demeanor. The raw energy of impending destruction radiated from my skin. I bypassed the crowded bar and positioned myself near the front of the main stage. The lighting suddenly dimmed, shifting to a focused spotlight, illuminating the center podium. The string quartet faded out, replaced by a booming cinematic introduction playing over the sound system. It was time for the main event. An enthusiastic master of ceremonies stepped to the microphone, his voice echoing across the vast room. He spent 3 agonizing minutes praising the supposedly revolutionary impact of Bradley's startup, weaving a fabricated narrative of unmatched industry dominance. The crowd applauded politely, entirely ignorant of the massive financial sinkhole they were currently standing inside. "Ladies and gentlemen," the announcer declared, his voice swelling with artificial excitement, "please welcome the visionary founder and chief executive officer, the man who turned a simple idea into a global phenomenon, Bradley." The ballroom erupted into thunderous applause. Bradley strode confidently from the side of the stage, buttoning his tuxedo jacket with an air of supreme, unearned importance. He smiled broadly, waving to the wealthy investors and socialites as if he were a conquering hero returning from battle. Serena followed behind him, her silver gown catching the harsh spotlight. She practically floated to her designated spot just slightly behind the podium, her face stretched into a perfectly rehearsed mask of adoring devotion. She was basking in the stolen glory, completely oblivious that her existence was funded by my hijacked inheritance. Bradley reached the microphone, gripping the edges of the podium. He paused, letting the applause wash over him, drinking in the validation he so desperately craved. He adjusted his posture, puffing out his chest to project authority. "Thank you," Bradley began, his voice dripping with false humility. "Thank you all for being here tonight to celebrate 5 incredible years of groundbreaking innovation. When I look out at this magnificent room, I am overwhelmed by the journey that brought us here." He paused for dramatic effect, looking out over the sea of faces. His gaze swept right past me, either deliberately ignoring my presence or simply too blinded by his own ego to notice the apex predator waiting in the front row. "People often ask me about the secret to my success," Bradley continued, leaning into the microphone. "They ask how a young man with a vision managed to disrupt such a competitive industry. There are no shortcuts. I am a self-made man. I built this entire enterprise from the ground up through sheer determination, sleepless nights, and an unrelenting work ethic. When banks told me my ideas were too ambitious, I refused to listen. When veterans told me to slow down, I accelerated. I relied entirely on my own grit, my own intellect, and my own unshakable belief in my corporate vision." The hypocrisy was so thick I could practically taste it in the air. A self-made man. The phrase was a repulsive joke. He was a spectacular fraud standing on a foundation of $15 million in toxic debt and severe federal securities violations. He had never worked a difficult day in his entire privileged life. He had simply held out his hand and allowed my parents to fill it with my stolen $5 million trust fund. Serena nodded behind him, playing the role of the supportive wife flawlessly. She dabbed at a completely non-existent tear in the corner of her eye, soaking up the admiring glances from the wealthy crowd. Bradley shifted his weight, his smile widening into something almost predatory. "But even a self-made man needs a strong foundation," he announced smoothly. "While I provided the vision and the tireless execution, I must acknowledge the profound emotional and structural support of my incredible family." He gestured grandly toward the front row. I glanced backward. My parents, Helen and Marcus, had just slipped back into the ballroom from the private lounge. They looked incredibly tense, their faces pale, but they quickly masked their panic for the cameras. I want to specifically thank my generous, supportive in-laws, Marcus and Helen, Bradley declared loudly. The spotlight swung to illuminate them. When I first conceptualized this company, they saw my potential immediately. They recognized a winner. They stood by me, offering invaluable guidance and unwavering family loyalty. They understood that true legacy requires sacrifice and bold investments. They have been the absolute bedrock of this family's success. The crowd clapped politely for my parents. My father offered a stiff, nervous wave, his eyes darting frantically around the room until they locked directly onto mine. He looked utterly terrified. He knew the audio recording of his explicit felony confession was resting safely in my pocket. He knew the deed transfer was ruined. He was trapped in the spotlight, forced to smile while standing on a rapidly deteriorating financial landmine. This 5-year anniversary is just the beginning, Bradley proclaimed, his voice rising to a triumphant crescendo. We are expanding our operations. We are dominating the market. We have secured massive new streams of capital that will propel this company into the stratosphere. I promise you tonight the next 5 years will be incredibly lucrative. We are building an untouchable empire. The ballroom exploded into a standing ovation. Wealthy investors raised their glasses, cheering for the arrogant man defrauding them. Serena stepped forward, wrapping her arms around Bradley's neck and kissing him dramatically. The illusion was absolutely perfect. They were at the very top of their manufactured mountain. I took a slow breath, letting the applause wash over me. I smoothed my lapels and stepped toward the main stage. The time for silence ended. I moved with absolute purpose. 3 shallow carpeted steps separated the main floor from the elevated platform. I ascended them without making a single sound. Bradley was still smiling at the cheering audience, his hand waving graciously in the harsh spotlight. He did not notice my approach until I was standing directly beside him. I reached out and smoothly wrapped my fingers around the sleek metal stem of the microphone. I pulled it firmly from his grasp. Bradley recoiled, his smile collapsing into an expression of utter bewilderment. He looked at me as if an apparition had suddenly materialized on his stage. The audience noticed the sudden unscripted movement. The thunderous applause faltered, sputtering out in confused pockets, until a heavy, uncomfortable silence descended upon the vast ballroom. Hundreds of wealthy investors and elite socialites stared up at the stage, their eyes locked on the woman in the avant-garde bleached blazer commanding the spotlight. "Excuse me," Bradley hissed through clenched teeth. He leaned in desperately, trying to maintain his composure while aggressively reaching for the microphone stand. "Security will throw you out right now. Get off my stage." I did not step back. I brought the microphone to my lips. "A self-made man," I spoke. My voice boomed through the massive speakers, echoing off the crystal chandeliers and striking the silent crowd with absolute clarity. It is an incredibly compelling narrative. It speaks to the core of the American dream: vision, grit, and tireless execution. I turned my head slightly, locking eyes with Bradley. His face was draining of blood. Serena stood frozen a few feet away, her hands clutching the fabric of her expensive silver gown. "Unfortunately, the narrative you just applauded is a complete fabrication," I announced. A collective gasp rippled through the audience. I saw venture capitalists shifting uncomfortably in their seats. "My name is Dr. Kira Vance Washington. I am Bradley's sister-in-law, and I am standing here tonight to provide some essential corrections to the financial history of this enterprise. Bradley claims he built this company from the ground up when banks refused to listen. He claims his generous in-laws recognized a winner and provided crucial emotional support. The reality is far more sinister." I looked down at the front row where my parents were sitting. My father looked like he was about to suffer a catastrophic cardiac event. My mother was covering her mouth with trembling hands. Bradley's initial seed capital did not come from a brilliant pitch or a bank loan, I stated, ensuring my diction was razor sharp. It was stolen. Exactly 10 years ago, my late grandmother established an irrevocable trust fund containing $5 million in liquid assets. It was legally designated exclusively for my medical education and career advancement. My parents, acting as my legal guardians, systematically abused their authority. They drained my entire trust fund, committing grand larceny and wire fraud to secretly bankroll Bradley's startup. The silence in the ballroom became deafening. The wealthy elite abhorred financial scandals that threatened their own investments, and I was dropping a nuclear bomb directly onto their elegant dinner tables. "You are lying!" Serena shrieked from behind me. Her voice cracked wildly, shattering the tension. "Turn off her microphone, she is a jealous lunatic. I am a neurosurgeon and the chief executive officer of a biotech corporation valued at nearly $1 billion. I countered immediately, projecting my voice over her hysterical outburst. "I do not experience jealousy, I experience audits. And an audit of this company reveals a terrifying truth. The $5 million stolen from my trust fund was entirely squandered within the first 3 years of operation. It was completely burned on luxury vehicles, exorbitant executive salaries, and gross operational incompetence." Bradley lunged toward me, desperate to cut the audio feed. I anticipated his movement, stepping smoothly to the side while maintaining a firm grip on the microphone. "Security!" Bradley screamed, his voice breaking with panic. "Remove this woman immediately!" Two large men in dark suits began moving toward the stage from the side exits. I pointed directly at the primary investors sitting at the head tables. "I would advise you to listen very carefully before you throw me out," I commanded. My authority froze the security guards in their tracks. "You are all sitting in this room believing you are part of a massive technological expansion. Bradley just stood here and promised you extremely lucrative returns over the next 5 years. He promised you an untouchable empire." I paused, letting the weight of my impending revelation hang heavily over the terrified crowd. I looked at Bradley. He was sweating profusely, his arrogant facade entirely shattered, revealing the pathetic, desperate fraud hiding underneath. "This company is not expanding," I declared ruthlessly. "It is effectively bankrupt. As of this morning, Bradley is carrying exactly $15 million in toxic, unserviceable debt. He has defaulted on his last 3 commercial loan payments. His primary vendors have placed him on strict cash-only terms because he cannot pay his invoices. The massive streams of capital he just promised you do not exist." The ballroom erupted into chaos. Investors stood up from their tables, shouting questions and demanding answers. Men in tailored suits pulled out their phones, frantically calling their financial advisors. Bradley raised his hands, desperately trying to quiet the raging storm. "She is crazy," Bradley yelled, his voice completely lost in the escalating panic. "Our quarterly reports are solid. You have all seen the revenue projections. Those revenue projections are heavily falsified." I announced, my voice cutting through the noise like a scythe. "Bradley has been aggressively cooking the books to secure short-term loans from predatory equity firms. He is artificially inflating revenue streams to hide the massive deficits. It is a direct, undeniable violation of federal securities laws. The Securities and Exchange Commission will be heavily involved by Monday morning." Serena collapsed onto the floor, sobbing uncontrollably. Bradley stood paralyzed. I prepared the final execution blow. The sheer scale of the panic transforming the grand ballroom was spectacular to witness. Men and women who prided themselves on immaculate social composure were shouting over each other, completely discarding their polished manners. Bradley suddenly snapped out of his frozen stupor. His face flushed a violent mottled crimson. The veins in his neck bulged against his tight silk collar. He let out a feral roar of pure rage and lunged directly at me. His heavy hands clawed frantically at the microphone stand, desperate to silence the absolute destruction of his fraudulent empire. "Get her off this stage right now!" Bradley shrieked, spit flying from his lips. He turned wildly toward the 2 security guards who had halted at the edge of the platform. "I am paying you to protect this venue. Tackle her, drag this deranged woman out of my gala." The security guards hesitated, exchanging nervous glances. They were trained to handle unruly drunks, not to physically assault a woman who had just claimed to be a billionaire chief executive officer in front of New York's financial elite. I stood my ground, my posture radiating an immovable, icy calm. I did not relinquish my grip on the microphone. I simply shifted my weight, daring them to lay a single finger on my custom blazer. "Do not touch her," a voice boomed from the center of the frantic crowd. It was my father, Marcus. He violently shoved his way past a group of panicked investors, dragging my mother Helen by the wrist. They reached the foot of the stage, their faces contorted with absolute hatred and blind desperation. "Do not listen to a single word she says," my mother screamed at the top of her lungs, addressing the horrified onlookers. Her voice was shrill, completely stripped of her usual country club elegance. "She is a pathological liar. She is a deeply unstable, jealous woman. She has spent her entire life trying to ruin her sister's perfect happiness." My father pointed a shaking, accusatory finger directly at my face. "She is a bitter failure," he roared, trying to project his voice over the chaotic din of the ballroom. "Look at her. Look at what she is wearing. She walked into a black tie event wearing a jacket covered in chemical burns just to throw a psychotic tantrum. Does this look like a successful neurosurgeon to any of you? Does this look like a billionaire? She is having a massive mental breakdown because she could never achieve what Bradley has built." The wealthy investors turned their attention from me to my screaming parents, clearly disturbed by the vicious family meltdown unfolding before their eyes. Bradley's parents, seated at the primary VIP table, looked absolutely mortified. His mother clutched her pearl necklace, pale as a ghost, while his father aggressively whispered into a mobile phone, likely calling his own corporate attorneys. "She fabricated this entire story!" Serena shrieked from the floor behind me, her silver gown pooled around her knees. She scrambled to her feet, her makeup completely ruined by tears. "She is obsessed with destroying my marriage. She has no proof of anything. Throw her in an asylum." "I have absolutely no need to fabricate anything," I replied calmly into the microphone, letting my voice drown out their frantic, overlapping lies. "Your desperate attempts to discredit my mental health are exactly what you threatened to do in the private lounge 10 minutes ago. You threatened to ruin my reputation if I did not sign over my land to bail out this collapsing company. Unfortunately for you, your threats are as entirely hollow as Bradley's bank accounts." "Shut up, shut up!" Bradley bellowed, slamming his fist against the wooden podium. He grabbed the arm of the nearest security guard and physically shoved the man toward me. "Get her out of here now." The guard stumbled forward, raising his hands awkwardly. "Ma'am, I am going to have to ask you to step down," he muttered, terrified of the potential liability involved in touching me. "If you place a hand on me, my legal team will ensure you never work in private security again," I told the guard softly, but with enough venom to make him freeze instantly. I turned my attention back to the raging, desperate man standing beside the podium. "You cannot silence the truth with brute force, Bradley. You cannot scream loud enough to make $15 million of toxic debt simply disappear. Your investors are calling their brokers. Your fraudulent empire is burning down right in front of your eyes." My mother slammed her hands against the edge of the stage, her perfectly styled hair falling wildly. "You are a monster, Kira. We gave you everything, we raised you, and this is how you repay us. You are dead to this family. You are completely dead to us." "I was dead to you the moment you stole my trust fund to buy Serena a luxury wedding," I corrected her, ensuring the microphone caught every word. "You traded your daughter's future for a magnificent financial disaster. You backed a complete loser, Helen. You are going to lose absolutely everything alongside him." Bradley sensed the lingering doubt in the room and desperately seized the narrow opportunity to regain control. "She has no proof," Bradley yelled, pacing the stage like a trapped animal. "It is baseless slander. She is throwing out wild numbers to cause panic. My company is fully solvent. Our revenue is verified. Do not let this insane woman manipulate you into abandoning the greatest technological investment of the decade." I was sweating profusely, begging them to believe his pathetic illusion just for a few more minutes. He was relying on their inherent bias, hoping they would blindly trust a white man over a black woman in a ruined blazer. He was making his final stand on a stage built entirely on lies. I smiled warmly at him. It was a terrifying, hollow expression. I did not need to scream aloud. I raised my right hand, snapping my fingers with a sharp crack that cut perfectly through the residual murmurs of the ballroom. Up in the glass-enclosed audio-visual booth, overlooking the grand space, my executive assistant Elena had been waiting for exactly this signal. She had quietly infiltrated the hotel's technical staff hours before the event began, armed with an encrypted flash drive holding a catastrophic digital payload. The towering digital projection screen behind Bradley suddenly flickered, his pretentious gold leaf anniversary logo aggressively distorted into harsh static before wiping completely black. Bradley whipped his head around, staring blankly at the massive empty canvas. The string quartet had long since fled the corner, leaving only the hum of the heavy projectors filling the heavy silence. A high-definition document snapped onto the screen 50 feet wide and completely undeniable. It was a bank ledger from 10 years ago. I pointed up at the glaring numbers. You demanded proof of my stolen inheritance. I projected my voice effortlessly over the stunned crowd. Please direct your attention to the screen. You are looking at the original deposit of $5 million from the estate of Dr. Eleanor Washington, designated to a protected medical trust. The image zoomed in, highlighting two distinct signatures. And here are the authorized withdrawal signatures of Helen and Marcus Vance, liquidating the entire account exactly 1 month before Serena's lavish wedding. My mother let out a strangled, breathless gasp, physically stumbling backward into my father's chest. The wealthy guest leaned in, pulling out designer reading glasses to scrutinize the undeniable financial records displayed above. A new document flashed on the screen. It was a wire transfer receipt showing the exact stolen amount moving directly into a corporate account registered to Bradley. Seed capital, I announced coldly, making sure every syllable hit its mark. Stolen from a black woman's medical education to fund a white man's fragile ego and a failing enterprise. Bradley lunged desperately at the podium, frantically pressing buttons to kill the projector feed, but Elena had completely locked him out of his own system. The screen shifted again. This time, a series of internal corporate emails illuminated the ballroom. The bold red letters highlighted Bradley's own desperate messages to his chief financial officer. The text was damning. We have to inflate the quarterly projections by 40%, or the bank will pull the bridge loan. Bradley's own digitized words glared down at the horrified audience. Next to the emails, a massive split screen appeared. On the left were the fabricated, highly profitable tax returns he had shown his investors. On the right were the actual bleeding ledgers, showing extreme negative cash flow and numerous vendor defaults. The wealthy venture capitalists did not need me to explain what they were seeing. They were apex predators in finance, and they smelled fresh blood in the water. An older man in a charcoal suit, one of Bradley's primary angel investors, cursed loudly and immediately began dialing his legal team on his mobile phone. The facade of the self-made tech prodigy was disintegrating pixel by pixel before their very eyes. Bradley was finally exposed as a desperate, incompetent criminal forging financial documents to simply maintain his country club membership. "Those are manipulated!" Bradley screamed, his voice cracking with severe, uncontrollable panic. "She hacked my servers. This is illegal corporate espionage. Do not look at those screens." "It is called a basic financial audit," I corrected him smoothly, pacing slowly across the front of the stage. "And I am perfectly entitled to review your internal communications because I am no longer just a wronged relative." I gave another sharp upward nod toward the enclosed audio-visual booth. The final document slammed onto the massive screen, accompanied by a digital chime that sounded like a death knell. It was a binding legal deed of assignment, fully notarized and filed with the state Supreme Court just yesterday morning. The document legally transferred ownership of a $15 million debt portfolio. The purchaser was listed clearly in bold black text, Obsidian Holdings Limited Liability Company. Below that, the primary controlling entity was revealed as Dr. Kira Vance Washington. The collective realization washed over the entire ballroom like a devastating tidal wave of solid ice. I stepped closer to the trembling, utterly defeated man, sweating profusely on the stage. "You told me earlier tonight to bow my head and accept my lesser place in the world," I said, my voice dropping to a terrifyingly intimate register that the microphone caught perfectly. "You threatened to completely ruin my employment prospects if I did not gratefully accept a minimum wage job fetching coffee at a private clinic. You thought you held all the power in this room because you mistakenly believed you held all the wealth." I gestured toward the glaring 50-foot legal document hovering ominously above his head. "I am the sole proprietor of Obsidian Holdings. I quietly bought every single toxic loan your failing company possesses." I own your commercial leases, I own your intellectual property, and I own the personal guarantees you foolishly signed to keep this sinking ship afloat for one more night. You do not own an empire, Bradley. You are merely a tenant living in a house that I hold the keys to, and your eviction notice is exceptionally past due. Serena let out a gut-wrenching wail, dropping heavily to her knees on the cold marble floor, her heavy silver gown pooled around her shaking body as absolute financial ruin finally set in. Bradley's wealthy parents, seated in the front row, stood up in profound, silent horror. His father refused to look at him, grabbing his wife's arm and turning his back on his son to distance their family name from the securities violations currently displayed on the screen. Bradley looked completely, utterly emasculated. His chest heaved with panicked breaths as his wild eyes darted from the projector screen to his fleeing investors and finally back to me. I stepped directly into his line of sight, blocking his desperate view of the exiting crowd. As the primary debt holder, I announced, my voice slicing through the escalating panic, I am officially initiating immediate foreclosure proceedings. Effective at exactly 9 o'clock this coming Monday morning, Obsidian Holdings will assume complete operational control of this facility and all associated corporate assets. Your physical servers will be seized. Your bank accounts are already frozen. Your intellectual property, your patents, your client lists, and your hardware now belong entirely to my portfolio. This company is officially in liquidation, and your position as chief executive officer is permanently terminated. Bradley staggered backward, as if I had physically struck him with a heavy, blunt object. He collided with the wooden podium, his knuckles turning white as he gripped the edges to keep himself from collapsing completely to the floor. He opened his mouth to formulate a defense, to scream another denial, but no sound emerged from his throat. The arrogant tech visionary was reduced to a hyperventilating shell of a man. The venture capitalists who had praised him mere minutes ago were now aggressively surging toward the exits, shouting frantically into their cell phones. They were desperately ordering their financial teams to dump any associated stock and sever all corporate ties before the federal investigations officially launched. The grand ballroom, previously filled with polite applause and classical music, was now a chaotic war zone of fleeing millionaires. The most devastating blow did not come from the fleeing investors. It came directly from the front row. Bradley's father, Richard, a man whose entire existence was predicated on pristine social standing, political influence, and generational wealth, marched toward the stage. His face was a rigid mask of absolute fury and deep disgust. His wife Eleanor trailed closely behind him. She clutched her expensive evening wrap tightly around her shoulders, as if trying to shield herself from the immense radioactive fallout radiating from the podium. Richard did not look at me. He completely ignored my presence and focused his burning rage entirely on his son. "You forged federal documents!" Richard hissed, his voice trembling with a terrifying mixture of anger and profound embarrassment. "You lied to us! You lied to the executive board! You dragged our immaculate family name into a massive federal securities fraud investigation just to play pretend with your incompetent friends." Bradley reached a trembling hand toward his father, tears finally spilling over his eyelashes. "Dad, please," he begged, his voice cracking pitifully. "I can fix this. It is just a temporary cash flow issue. I just need a bridge loan from the family trust. If you just cover the deficit until the next quarter, I can restructure the debt and buy her out. Please do not abandon me." Richard slapped his son's hand away with vicious, unforgiving force. The sharp sound echoed clearly over the remaining crowd. "There is no family trust for you anymore," Richard growled, his eyes cold and utterly devoid of paternal affection. "Did you not hear a single word this woman just said? You are $15 million in the red. The Securities and Exchange Commission will be knocking on our door by tomorrow morning with federal warrants. I will not allow your pathetic financial crimes to infect my legitimate businesses. I am calling my elite attorneys the exact second I step out of this building. We are legally severing all ties with you and this fraudulent sinkhole." Serena scrambled up from the cold marble floor. Her heavy silver gown was tangled around her legs, her pristine makeup completely destroyed by thick rivers of black mascara. She threw herself toward Bradley's mother, reaching out with shaking hands to grab the older woman's arm. Eleanor, you have to help us. Serena sobbed hysterically, her voice echoing with raw desperation. You know Bradley is a good man. We are family. We just need a little bit of help to get through this misunderstanding. We belong in your circle. Eleanor violently yanked her arm out of Serena's grasp, taking a large step backward, as if Serena were covered in a highly contagious disease. She looked my sister up and down with an expression of pure, unadulterated revulsion. Do not ever touch me again. Eleanor snapped, her aristocratic voice dripping with absolute venom. You are absolutely not family. You and your conniving parents brought this horrific disaster to our doorstep. You happily spent stolen money to buy your way into our exclusive circle. You are nothing but a cheap, pathetic liability who enabled his delusions. That is not true, Serena wailed, turning frantically toward Bradley for defense. Bradley, tell them we belong here, defend me. But Bradley remained entirely silent, his head hung low in ultimate defeat. Richard adjusted his tailored suit jacket, smoothing the lapels with sharp, angry movements. He looked at his son one last time. You are entirely on your own, Richard stated with terrifying finality. Do not call our home. Do not contact our lawyers. You made this bed of lies, and now you can rot in it alone. Without another word, Richard placed a protective hand on his wife's lower back and guided her swiftly toward the main exit. They did not look back. They left their son standing on a stage surrounded by the ashes of his destroyed life. They prioritized their social status and financial safety over their own flesh and blood without a single second of hesitation. Serena screamed after them, a raw, animalistic sound of pure despair. She realized in that exact moment that her carefully constructed world of elite privilege was entirely gone. She was no longer a wealthy socialite. She was the broke, disgraced wife of a federal criminal facing imminent prison time. I watched the entire exchange with cold, silent detachment. I lowered the microphone, the heavy metal feeling cool and satisfying against my palm. The financial execution was flawless, but my ultimate pursuit of justice was not finished. The heavy double doors of the grand ballroom swung open once more. The panicked exodus of wealthy investors momentarily parted, creating a wide, clear path down the center aisle. 3 figures walked through the threshold, moving in perfect, intimidating synchronization. Leading the trio was Marcus Sterling, my lead corporate counsel. He wore a sharp charcoal gray tailored suit and carried a thick black leather briefcase. 2 junior associates flanked him, their expressions mirroring his absolute professional ruthlessness. They did not look at the fleeing socialites or the weeping sister collapsed on the marble floor. Their eyes were locked directly on my parents, Helen and Marcus, who were still standing near the front row in a state of paralyzed shock. My parents had watched Bradley's complete destruction with terrified fascination, completely unaware that the guillotine was now swinging toward their own necks. I stepped down from the elevated platform, my custom blazer, catching the harsh light of the projectors. I walked slowly toward them, arriving at the exact moment my legal team halted in front of the tables. Marcus Sterling unlatched his heavy leather briefcase with a sharp, echoing click. He extracted 2 thick, identical stacks of legal documents, securely bound with heavy red bands. He did not offer a polite greeting. He extended his arms, thrusting one stack toward my mother and the other toward my father. Marcus and Helen Vance, the lawyer announced, his voice carrying the terrifying weight of absolute legal authority. You are hereby formally served. These documents detail a massive civil lawsuit filed jointly in the federal and state courts this morning. You are both named as primary defendants in multiple counts of grand larceny, breach of fiduciary duty, and severe trust fraud. My father stared at the thick stack of papers pressed against his chest. His hands trembled violently as he reflexively grasped the documents. He looked down at the bold legal print, his eyes widening in horror as the reality of the situation finally pierced through his narcissistic delusions. You cannot do this, my father whispered, his voice hoarse and completely stripped of its former arrogant bravado. We are your parents. You cannot sue your own blood. I am not just suing you, I corrected him, stepping closer, so he could see the cold, unforgiving calculation in my eyes. I am dismantling you. The civil lawsuit is merely the mechanism for reclaiming the stolen $5 million, plus 10 years of accumulated interest and heavy punitive damages. The real catastrophe you are facing is the federal criminal investigation. Marcus Sterling stepped forward, adjusting his silk tie. In the process of tracing the hijacked funds, the lawyer explained clinically, our forensic accounting team discovered severe irregularities in your personal financial disclosures over the past decade. You deliberately failed to report the $5 million trust liquidation as taxable income. You actively utilized offshore holding accounts to obscure the transfer to Bradley's corporation. The Internal Revenue Service takes an exceptionally harsh stance on deliberate tax evasion of this magnitude. We have already forwarded our entire comprehensive dossier to their Criminal Investigation Division. My mother let out a sharp, breathless gasp. She dropped her stack of legal documents onto the floor, the heavy thud echoing in the rapidly emptying ballroom. She grabbed her husband's arm, her perfectly manicured fingernails digging desperately into his tuxedo jacket. The IRS! Helen choked out her face, draining of all color until she looked like a walking corpse. They will seize the house. They will take the colonial. They will seize absolutely everything, I confirmed smoothly. Your sprawling colonial mansion in Connecticut, your luxury vehicles, your retirement portfolios, and your jewelry. Every single piece of expensive jewelry you bought with my stolen inheritance will be confiscated. The federal government will freeze all your assets by Monday morning to secure the owed back taxes and massive fraud penalties. You are going to be completely destitute. My father looked up at me, his face twisting into a desperate, pleading mask. Kira, please, he begged, his voice cracking pitifully. We can settle this quietly. We can sell the house and pay you back over time. You do not have to involve the federal authorities. We will lose everything. We will go to prison. Yes, you will, I replied, feeling absolutely no sympathy for the monsters who had gleefully destroyed my youth. And you will not be able to negotiate a plea deal. You see, an hour ago in that private lounge, you explicitly confessed to liquidating my irrevocable trust fund. You confessed to buying Serena a wedding and funding a tech startup. You admitted to wire fraud on a digital audio recording that is currently sitting safely in my pocket. That recording has already been uploaded to a secure cloud server and transmitted to the Office of the Federal Prosecutor. The absolute finality of my statement struck them like a physical blow. The audio recording was the final inescapable nail in their coffins. They had willingly handed me the exact weapon needed to guarantee their incarceration. They could not lie their way out of a recorded confession. They could not manipulate a judge the way they manipulated our extended family. The protective bubble of their affluent suburban existence had violently burst, exposing them to the brutal, unforgiving machinery of the federal justice system. Helen collapsed into a nearby chair, burying her face in her hands as she began to sob uncontrollably. She wept for her impending poverty, her destroyed social standing, and the terrifying prospect of a federal prison cell. Marcus stood frozen, staring blankly at the ruined legal documents scattered across the polished marble floor. He looked like an empty shell, completely hollowed out by the sudden catastrophic loss of his entire manufactured world. He realized that the daughter he treated as a disposable scapegoat was now the architect of his absolute destruction. I turned away from their pathetic sobbing. The legal execution was completely finalized. It was now time to address my sister. Serena was still sprawled on the cold marble floor of the grand ballroom. The heavy silver fabric of her designer gown now looked like a tangled parachute trapping her in the wreckage of her own life. She stared blankly at the massive projector screen, her mind trying to process the catastrophic shift in her reality. The golden child, safely insulated by stolen wealth and endless parental validation, was suddenly plummeting into absolute poverty. Her husband was a disgraced criminal, publicly disowned by his own aristocratic family. Her parents were currently hyperventilating over a federal indictment that would seize their mansion and likely put them behind bars. Serena had absolutely nothing left, The illusion she had built her entire identity around was completely shattered. She slowly turned her tear-stained face toward me. The malicious arrogance that usually danced in her bright blue eyes had completely vanished, replaced by a raw, hollow terror. She pushed herself up onto her hands and knees, ignoring the few remaining catering staff and security guards who were awkwardly watching the affluent family self-destruct. Serena crawled across the polished floor, her movements jerky and frantic. She reached out with trembling hands and grabbed the hem of my black silk gown. Her fingers curled tightly into the dark fabric as she tilted her head back to look up at me. "Kira, please!" Serena sobbed, her voice a pathetic, high-pitched whine. Tears carved thick tracks through her expensive foundation. "You cannot do this to me. I am your sister. We share the same blood. You cannot leave me with him. Bradley is going to jail and his family cut us off completely. I have no money. I have nowhere to go. The bank is going to take my house. You have millions of dollars. You own a company. Please just give me a small piece, just enough to start over. I will do whatever you want. I will publicly apologize. I will scrub your floors. Just do not leave me." Her desperation was entirely genuine, but it was not born of remorse. She was not crying because she felt guilty for destroying my blazer 10 years ago, or for happily spending the trust fund that was meant to secure my medical career. She was only crying because she had finally been caught, and the consequences of her profound selfishness were directly impacting her own comfort. I looked down at her shaking form, feeling an incredible sense of clarity. There was no lingering resentment, no hot flash of anger. There was only the cold, sterile detachment of a surgeon observing a malignant tumor that had finally been completely excised from the host body. I reached up and grasped the sharp lapels of my custom avant-garde blazer. The heavy garment, fortified with premium backing and encrusted with thousands of black Swarovski crystals, felt like a suit of armor that had successfully served its absolute purpose. I slowly unbuttoned the front, allowing the blood-red silk lining to catch the harsh light of the ballroom. I slipped my arms out of the sleeves, the cool air of the large room washing over my bare shoulders. I held the jacket in my hands for a brief moment, feeling the thick molten gold embroidery that permanently outlined the chaotic bleach stains Serena had maliciously poured onto the original fabric. I looked directly into her terrified, weeping eyes. I let go of the collar. The heavy blazer fell, landing directly onto Serena's lap. The weight of the embellished garment forced her to slump slightly backward. She stared down at the gold and obsidian glittering against the ruined orange bleach marks. "You want a piece of my wealth," I said, my voice echoing with a terrifyingly calm resonance. "You want me to hand you salvation simply because we share genetics. You still do not understand how this world actually functions, Serena. You spent your entire life believing that success is something you can just take from someone else. You thought power was a wedding ring, a stolen trust fund, and an imported dress. You believed that if you simply looked the part, the universe would blindly reward you." I took a slow, deliberate step closer to her, forcing her to shrink back against the cold marble. "Real power cannot be stolen, and it certainly cannot be gifted." I continued, delivering the words like precise surgical incisions. "It is forged in the absolute darkest moments of your life, when everyone supposed to protect you decides to throw you to the wolves. You poured toxic chemicals on my only professional jacket because you wanted to break my spirit. You wanted me to fail so you could feel superior. But you did not break me. You simply provided the exact catalyst I needed to build an empire. I wore that ruined blazer into a room full of elite surgeons, and I earned my place through sheer brilliance and unrelenting execution." Serena squeezed her eyes shut, pressing her hands against her ears, as if she could physically block out the crushing reality of my words. "I took the trauma this family inflicted upon me and weaponized it," I declared softly. "I built a $1 billion corporation while you played house with a fraud. I hold patents that save lives while your husband forges documents to save his ego. You are sitting on the floor begging for scraps because you never actually earned a single thing you possessed. You are a parasite who has finally run out of hosts." I pointed down at the heavy customized blazer resting in her lap. "Keep the jacket," I commanded with absolute finality. It is the only valuable thing you are ever going to get from me. Wear it as a permanent reminder of the night you tried to destroy my future, and the night I returned to completely dismantle yours. You are officially cut off from my universe. Do not ever speak my name again. I turned away from this pathetic sight of my sister clutching the ruined garment. Her frantic sobs echoed off the polished marble floors, mixing with the angry shouts of the remaining investors who were still desperately trying to salvage their massive portfolios. I did not look back. I stepped over the trailing edge of her silver gown and walked toward the center aisle of the ballroom. The space that had previously felt like a suffocating cage of elitist judgments now felt entirely open. The sea of wealthy socialites parted for me instantly. They no longer saw a poorly dressed outsider or a struggling relative begging for charity. They saw a ruthless force of nature, who had just publicly executed a corporate empire without breaking a single drop of sweat. I walked with my spine perfectly straight, the red silk lining of my gown brushing softly against the floor. As I approached the main exit, I passed the table where my parents were still standing. My father was clutching the thick stack of legal documents to his chest, as if they were a physical shield. He looked aged, hollowed out by the sudden evaporation of his stolen wealth. My mother was slumped in a chair, her face buried in her hands, weeping for the colonial mansion and the country club memberships she was about to lose. They did not try to stop me. They did not scream my name or hurl any more empty threats. The crushing weight of the federal indictments had finally silenced them completely. They were trapped in the wreckage of their own deceit, and I was leaving them exactly where they belonged. I pushed open the heavy glass doors of the grand ballroom, leaving the suffocating heat and the chaotic noise entirely behind me. The grand lobby of the luxury hotel was eerily quiet in comparison. The concierge who had initially sneered at my customized blazer now stood rigidly at attention behind his mahogany desk. He watched me walk across the thick carpets with an expression of profound respect and deep intimidation. He had undoubtedly heard the screaming and the explosive revelations filtering through the doors. I did not offer him a glance. I kept my eyes focused straight ahead, breathing in the crisp, clean air filtering through the lobby ventilation. I stepped out through the main revolving doors and onto the cobblestone driveway. The cool Manhattan night air washed over my bare shoulders, feeling incredibly refreshing after the stifling atmosphere of Bradley's fraudulent anniversary gala. The city lights sparkled brilliantly against the dark sky, reflecting off the sleek, polished exterior of my waiting Rolls-Royce. My private chauffeur, standing faithfully by the rear door, immediately straightened his posture as I approached. He reached out and smoothly pulled the heavy door open, offering a polite nod. I paused for a fraction of a second on the pavement, taking one final look at the glittering facade of the towering hotel. Inside that building, an arrogant thief was currently realizing he would be spending the next decade in a federal penitentiary. A golden child was discovering that the world did not care about her blonde hair or her imported dresses when her bank accounts were permanently frozen. And two narcissistic parents were finally facing the devastating consequences of trading their daughter's future for a temporary illusion of grandeur. The trap I had spent 10 agonizing years meticulously constructing had snapped shut with flawless, lethal precision. I slid into the spacious leather interior of the luxury vehicle. The plush seats enveloped me in quiet comfort. My chauffeur gently closed the door, sealing me inside a completely soundproof sanctuary. The chaotic drama of my toxic family was instantly muted. I leaned back against the soft headrest, closing my eyes and releasing a long, slow breath. There was no lingering adrenaline, no frantic heartbeat of anxiety. There was only an immense, profound sense of peace. The heavy burden I had carried since that freezing night in Connecticut, the suffocating weight of their betrayal, was entirely lifted from my shoulders. I had reclaimed my stolen legacy, multiplied it exponentially, and used it to deliver an absolutely inescapable justice. As the engine of the Rolls-Royce purred to life, a sharp, piercing sound cut through the quiet night air. It started as a distant wail, rapidly growing louder and more urgent as it echoed through the concrete canyons of the financial district. I opened my eyes and looked out the tinted window. Flashing red and blue lights illuminated the street corners several blocks away. The police sirens wailed fiercely, accompanied by the heavy rumble of unmarked federal vehicles closing in on the hotel. The Securities and Exchange Commission, the Internal Revenue Service, and the Federal Bureau of Investigation were all arriving to collect their respective bounties. The financial autopsy I had initiated was officially becoming a criminal raid. I watched the emergency vehicles swarm the hotel entrance, their harsh strobe lights painting the cobblestone driveway in frantic bursts of color. I felt absolutely no pity for the people trapped inside. They had forged their own chains, and tonight the federal government was simply snapping the padlocks closed. My chauffeur shifted the vehicle into gear and smoothly pulled away from the curb. We merged effortlessly into the steady flow of late-night Manhattan traffic, leaving the wailing sirens and the flashing lights completely behind us. The dark-tinted windows reflected the passing city skyline, a sprawling metropolis that I had successfully conquered on my own terms. I was no longer the discarded scapegoat or the victim of a malicious family agenda. I was Dr. Kira Vance Washington. I owned my brilliant mind. I owned my massive corporate empire. And most importantly, I owned my absolute freedom. The dark chapter of my past was permanently closed. I looked forward into the endless night ready for tomorrow. My grandma would have been incredibly proud to witness this exact moment. Total absolute closure was finally and completely mine.